Welcome. I'm Kit David. I'm an indie author, and today I am launching a book. I put them all away. I'm going to have to go grab some. Yeah, this will work. So, I am launching this book. Every day is Halloween, and no, I'm not drunk. I'm just trying to find my stride again. My gosh. So, yes, I am usually an author of fantasy and dark fiction, and I have decided to try paranormal fiction. And this is my latest release, Every Day is Halloween. It is a YA paranormal. YA is young adults. The main character is 15 years old, and she is living in a world where the dead have come back and they force the living into wearing costumes every single day. Or else. And I will just briefly read the back of the blurb for you so that you will get a better feel for the story. And it goes like this. Once upon a Halloween, ghouls and ghosts came to play. The living, however, proved quite rude, so the dead conspired to stay. Now the dead scare the living into wearing costumes every single day, or else. Amidst rumors of costume people being attacked by the dead, high school junior Esther worries she may never feel safe again. She's gotten comfortable wearing her death mask and black robe, even though she feels herself fading away at the edges. Without a costume, how can she appease Mishu, a black cat that patrols her street, or walk safely to school side by side with ghosts from eras past? Then there are the skeletal ghoul soldiers near the local cemetery who love to torment passersby. When Esther's bestie mysteriously disappears, she still can't ditch her costume. Dressed as death, will Esther find out what happened to her friend? And will she ever find the courage to step out of her comfort zone before fading into a mere shadow of herself? Hi, Sabrina. Thank you for joining me today. Oh, I'm glad to see you again. I'm just going to do a little bit of a recap of the afternoon session for anyone who missed it. Just so that just a few things so that people know a little bit more about the book before I dive into this session's topics. We've got basically a book that is part traditional prose and part epistolary fiction. The two are intertwined in such a way that it creates a linear and non-linear story. And the epistolary documents include things like magazine articles, newspaper clippings. There's a transcript of a podcast, comic strip. There's letters and emails, texts, and there's even some things that I didn't mention in the first session, was a private investigator's report. And yeah, it's really packed full of stuff. And of course, there are little inserts of the main character, Esther's digital journal, as she's trying to figure things out about the world she's living in and what has happened to her best friend. It's an interesting little project. The world building was challenging, but fun. And I've always wanted to do epistolary fiction, and this was my time to do it. And I really, really am pleased with the results. And on that note, I'm going to move into our topics for this session, which are more less about progress and more about what inspired the story and the central themes, which I think are really important, and it really resonated with me, and you'll understand why when I get to that subject. But before I get on to everything for this session, I just want to let people know to As I'm talking, if you have questions, please leave them in the comments. When we get to the end of the session, I will go through the comments and answer all the questions that you have. And I just want to say quickly hello to Donna again, and Jen. Yay, you're here, Jen. Awesome. And Cam, oh my gosh, thank you for being here. And Donna, did I mention Donna? Oh, this is awesome. It's nice to know that there's someone listening. It makes it feel less like I'm talking into the wind. So yes, just a reminder, leave your questions that you have as you're listening in the comment section, any comments that you have as well, and that would be very helpful. So just in brief, I read the back of the book. I just want to go in to the premise for this book. All stories, they generally, when it comes to theme, they're asking or trying to answer a very an overarching question for the story. And Esther lives in this world where the dead force her to wear a costume every day, or else she might get seriously hurt. Esther is the kind of person who is probably, out of all her friends, the one who doesn't mind wearing a costume. She doesn't mind pretending to be something she isn't, as long as it makes her feel safe. That is until her friends start disappearing, and that is the important motivation for her story and her transformation in the story. The question that I asked is based on what inspired the story to begin with, and there's a little bit of a story behind that. So back in last April, I had the opportunity to have a spot in Regan Macaulay's 13 Horrifically Silly Days of Halloween, her blog series, which she does every year. And it was a spot for a short story. And I saw that as a really great opportunity, and it giving me motivation to write a short story. Short fiction is not my strength. I try, and I end up writing super long stories that end up turning into novellas. And of course, every day is Halloween. I didn't fail to do that. It's definitely a good sized novella. So I was working on a story, and it wasn't really gelling for me. It was an interesting story, and I might go back to it one day, but it just wasn't screaming Halloween. It wasn't resonating as being scary, and I didn't know what to do with it, so I put it on a shelf. And I was out with a walk with my husband one day, and I told him the dilemma that I was having, that I needed to start over fresh with a new short story, and that I really wanted to write something that was fun and about Halloween, and I just didn't know what would be the starting point. And Sean blurted out the title of a ministry song, Every Day is Halloween. So I came back home, and I sat down, and I gave the old Every Day is Halloween a re-listen. It's been years. I believe that came out in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe the early 90s. I can't remember. It's been so long. And I also sat down and read the lyrics and analyzed them. And the first thing that came to mind was the theme of masking. And the question that also came to mind and became the driving force behind the story is, what would it be like to wear a costume every single day, and not by choice? Like, you have to wear a costume because it's law, and it's to protect yourself. It's for your own safety. And that became the driving force, the launching point into writing the story. And of course, when I was writing it, it just was a fragment here and a little bit there, and I didn't really know how all of it was going to come together, but eventually did come together. I ended up getting back to Regan and telling her that, the story that I'm working on was about 15,000 words, 15,000 words. And I told her, I said, it's really long. I'm going to try to get it down to 10,000 words. And I only had the one spot. And she reminded me that short stories are short. And, the blog is online. People are most likely not going to read something that long. And I worked really hard. I think I got it down to 12,000 words. And it was difficult because the project was actually starting to expand in my mind. I could see different ways of spinning the world building, and there were some more layers I wanted to go deeper into with the story. She published it. Thankfully, to my benefit, not to Regan's, one of the authors that had agreed to publish on her series dropped out, which meant there were 2 slots available, and she gave me the second slot. And Every Day is Halloween got published in 2 parts on her blog last year, and you can still see it there. It's still posted if you want to go see a rough, unpolished, still needed work kind of story. And if you're a writer and you want to see the difference between that and a little bit more editing, it's a great exercise for that. Excuse me. So when I started writing the story, it was to answer this basic question of what happens to a person when they're forced to costume all the time, forced to mask. And masking is, in fact, at the heart of the entire story. There's a lot of social commentary in this book as well. And it's done tongue-in-cheek. Just to give you an example, and I did these... I made a reference to these in the first session, but there are 2 magazine and articles here where I had a lot of fun with just coming up with titles for articles. The main article, and this article actually appears in the book, it's called Ghoul or Ghost? Where are your loved ones on the death spectrum? And then below it are 3 more titles. How to Get Gorgeous FX Wounds, Sigils and Wards for the Home Decorator, and 13 Zombie Looks You'll Love. Now, what's really important to understand about this magazine cover, it's called Living Today, and it's a spoof on Canadian living. So it's actually a lifestyle magazine. It's not like a horror effects magazine. And because of the setting of the world with the dead coming back, oppressing the living, the culture has been forced to embrace this new world that they're living in. And another one is a Morgue magazine, which is a spoof on Vogue, and I can never find this magazine cover in here. It has some interesting titles on it as well, such as Makeup or Mask, The Art of Deceiving the Dead. Another article title is Fitting In When No One Can See the Real You. So I had a lot of fun coming up with those titles. And the culture of the story it was different for me because this book is my first paranormal fiction story. And so I moved out of doing secondary fantasy world and trying to impose fantasy on the real world. And that's a challenge in itself, but it was also a very fun journey, and I enjoyed that. And I've kind of digressed from what I was talking about. Masking. Yes, masking. So masking becomes this central theme in the story. It is the sort of thing that we all do. to some degree or another at some point in our lives, whether it's putting on a facade at work, in or in any setting that might be what I would call, I don't want to say toxic, but perhaps you're just working with people who are not in the same headspace as you. And so there could be that, a defense, like putting on a mask could be a defense mechanism. I know that for myself, it's been a bit of a survival technique. I have a lot of social anxiety, and I will put on a mask, and what I think other people need me to be. And again, that I think is a lot something that a lot of people can really resonate with or connect with. In that I don't like talking or calling, putting labels on myself, but I do have leanings toward mild autism. My brain does not function the way other people's brains do. Being neurologically different from most of the people that are around you every day can be very challenging. And sometimes I just, I shut it down. I put that mask on. I go along to get along. Um, it's really only just now in life where I'm kind of like going, I don't care anymore. And there's a lot more discussion about this, and there's a lot more openness about neurodiversity, which I think is an amazing thing, because there's so many people out there that have tremendous skills to offer the world, but because they don't do it in the same way as other people, they get kind of shut down sometimes. Again, a very different world now compared to when I was younger. But masking is something that really resonated deeply with me when I started working on this story. And I really wanted to go into the effects that long-term masking can do to a person. I mean, it's fun once in a while to put on purple hair and just go with it, and put on a mask where nobody knows who you are and you can become anything you want. And that's fine for a day or 2 days, but 365 days of the year, because it's law, that's a whole other, game, and the world, I very seldom refer to the story as being dystopic. It's just the world has changed, or I should say dystopian. Um, it's just the world has changed, and not necessarily for the better, and that can be a really big struggle. But in this story, because the main characters are junior high schoolers, they're 15, 16, they're at that point where they're really trying to figure out their identities, and they want to express their identities, and they can't. And so this creates a lot of conflict for them, especially once the novelty of wearing costumes is worn off. And that is something I go into in the story, where at first it was fun and they're dressing up as all kinds of different things, and then they decide, just over time, they just end up, they don't have the money now to buy any more costumes, so they're making their own, and then they're trading costumes, and then at some point they just kind of slip into wearing the same costume. um, and you'll see a little bit of that progression in the book, as the characters are going through their day-to-day lives. But masking an identity, masking and putting on costumes is a really great way to explore our identity and our psyche, and it can have a very positive outcome. But to be doing it every day, all day, for the purposes of survival, which is what I wanted to get into the heart of, that that is central to this book. Um, and as you're reading the book, you will find out that Esther is, in fact, feeling the effects of it, the blurring between fantasy and reality, the fading at the edges, not quite sure who she is, She's doing things she wouldn't normally do. She starts lying to her mother, um, out of a sense of protecting her. But and then the hollowing effect that it has, where you start to feel invisible. There's the dark side of that. The positive side of that is also that Esther, because she's got this mask on, she can do things she's not done before. And she's not the kind of person who's normally bold or brash or will speak up. And she's able to do those things when she's pursuing finding out what happened to her best friend, Rebecca. But she also realizes that by being masked, she can't really fully show up in the world. And that that's a tragedy in itself, is that a lot of people feel they can't fully present themselves in the world because of whatever reason, even though it might be only a perceived reason. It still has like a negative impact on the psyche. And there are other themes in the story that aren't the central theme, but they tie in. We get the one group of people oppressing another group of people, and masking can be a side effect or an outcome of that when the one group of people is trying to survive, living alongside the people in power. We see that all the time. There's references to the pandemic. There's references to what's going on now in our politics and identity politics. And it's not overt, it's just suggested and inferred. And I think readers will walk away kind of just nodding their heads at the gentle references to what's going on in our world today. And on that note, I'm going to start a reading. I am going to read the beginning of the book, which is primarily Esther's story. But before I do, I'm just going to have a quick look at, okay, any comments? All right. And there aren't any new ones. So I'm just going to start into the reading, and I'll try not to read too quick. I have a habit of doing that. And here we go. Esther knelt before the front yard's retaining wall, where she clipped 6 new tulip blooms before their tangerine blush drew unwanted attention to her home. She wasn't the only one to worry about the flowers, though. Her bestie, Rebecca, who lived a few houses down, had helped her parents dig up every rosebush on the property. In Rebecca's words, "Frickin' no way we're chopping off every flower as soon as it blooms. My mom will be in tears all the time." Farther down, where Wolf Street dead-ended at the edge of a shroud of trees, even Hope Cemetery looked dreary. The caretakers had removed flowers and wreaths from every gravesite. It was safer that way. Less work. Everyone on Wolf Street had given up gardening. After the first week of spring, not a single place in Hopetown grew flowers. For Esther, nurturing the tulips was worth the risk. This way she could enjoy, however briefly, a remnant of the world that existed before Halloween came to stay last year. She just had to dispose of the blooms quickly. Each decapitated bloom fell, rolled briefly along the ground, remaining vibrant. It's not right, Esther thought bravely. They ought to die in their own way, in their own time, like nature intended. She scratched the skull mask covering her face, felt the weight of the robe's hood on her head, knowing she'd never expressed these thoughts to anyone. Not now, at least not until Halloween ended. Esther wished life didn't have to be this way. She missed walking with Rebecca to school, joking and laughing and acting silly. Now, if they didn't want to be bused or driven to school, they had to walk in groups. They had to look over their shoulders, be mindful of every little thing they did or said or wore, especially when they walked past the cemetery. Whenever they started down the dirt path at the end of the road, they rushed angst-filled through the amber woods to avoid encounters. Only when the path veered away from the cemetery's iron fence and exited onto Hazel Street did they find relief. And they always had to be dressed in some kind of Halloween costume. That way they wouldn't get heckled or yelled at, pinched, punched, or worse. This morning, before the decapitations, there was no sign of Miss Avery puttering around in her front yard. No one wandered the streets, not even the dead. Their absence provided Esther a rare opportunity to photograph the tulips with her emergency phone, which she kept hidden in a secret pocket in her black robe. After school, she'd share the image with her friends on her laptop, her preferred device for communication. Preserving the blossoms on their stalks this way wasn't quite the same as enjoying them in real life, but it was close enough. Barely enough. Esther froze. Something stirred in the bush beside her neighbor's garage. From beneath the branches, a skinny black cat named Mishu crawled stiffly out and limped toward her. Mishu stopped at the retaining wall and leered at the stems still tipped with fat buds, ready to bloom in the next day or two. Esther counted a dozen more blooms to be had, a dozen more rectangular holes to dig, each with its own pile of dirt, little graves, each big enough to hold one blossom. Mishu wheezed a raspy growl of disgust. A shiver betrayed Esther as she tried her best to ignore Mishu's dissatisfaction. I'm safe. The pumpkins on the stoop are holding it together. They haven't rotted entirely. Yet. To be certain, she glanced at them over her shoulder. Squirrels had gnawed the eyes and mouths. Within the misshapen eyes, the sacred Om symbols, carved on the inside, remained whole, protecting the stoop and the door to the house. Other wards marked the windows along the side of the house, and an altar in the back kept the patio door and yard safe. These markings kept the dead from scratching at their house day and night or spying through the windows. Tomorrow morning, I won't bother to photograph the tulips. I'll get on with the beheadings. Maybe if I get up early enough, Misha will be clawing at Miss Avery's door. Or maybe she'll be wandering down to the other end of the street, past Rebecca's place, past Devish's. I'll spend more time with the tulips, I will. But Misha was here, now, staring at her. On impulse, Esther clasped her mask's plastic chin. She meant to push it upwards a bit on her sweaty face, but stopped herself. The skull mask hid her well, except for her blue eyes, clear and bright, a dead giveaway that she was very much alive. Mishu didn't seem to notice. Or maybe you don't care. As long as I look dead, that's enough, right? Then Esther promised herself, one day, I'll move my mask around, see if you'll screech and call the others. Or maybe you'll attack me. Esther hiked the robe's threadbare sleeves past her elbows so they wouldn't snag on the retaining wall. Bones ran along the top and bottom of each arm, hand-painted lines along the black long-sleeved jersey she wore beneath. She noted how cracked and faded they looked. Time to repaint those soon. Ooh, a craft day. Esther endured the scrutiny of Mishu's dark almond eyes as she gathered up the decapitated blossoms and laid them in their individual graves. One by one, she covered them with a pile of loose dirt, then gently patted the mounds flat. Mishu purred with delight, a raspy, unearthly sound. Say words. Esther's breath hitched as her neck hairs prickled. Hearing Mishu speak unsettled her, triggering her instinct for self-protection. She tugged the sleeves of her black robe back down, feeling safer, albeit warmer, with an extra layer of fabric between them. Weird. Why would she want to give last rites to a flower? Esther wondered. Culling the tulips, burying them, that was important. By squashing out life, Esther proved to Mishu they shared something in common. She wanted the same outcome, even if deep down she didn't. Esther had figured this out last year, on the morning of the first day of the rising. Memories of that fateful day replayed in her mind, a day made even stranger because it had been a very sunny Halloween. Esther, get your butt down here. The skull donuts will be gone if we don't get to the market 5 minutes ago. Recognizing the impatience in her mother's tone, Esther flew down the stairs and pulled her favorite fall jacket from the closet. While slipping it on, her hand brushed against the edge of a photo frame on the wall next to the door, a picture of her and her mom from 2 summers ago. taken by her father when he was still around. She straightened it, then patted the front pocket of her jacket, felt the outline of her phone there. I want to kiss Carter. The thought popped out of nowhere as she tugged on a pair of red and white Vans and laced them up. Weird. I mean, there are cuter guys, right? And he's so quiet all the time, which makes him, I don't know, mysterious? I wonder if he likes freckles. Can't change those. But I can maybe dye my hair blue sometime. Anything other than boring brown. Maybe one day? Esther followed her mother out onto the front stoop. Sucking in a breath of cold air, she shut the door and listened to the whir of the mechanism locking behind them. At this end of the side yard, a pile of leaves beckoned to Esther. Soon, soon. After more leaves fall from the trees, I'll rake you into an even bigger pile. More cushion for me when I jump into you. Also impressive was the pumpkin she and her mom had carved together. Hey, Dopey, she whispered to it, but the pumpkin just sat on the stoop looking at nothing in particular with its perfectly slanted eyes, mouth wide and a toothy smile. From the corner of Esther's eye, she spotted a young boy. She was certain he lived on the street behind hers. Usually he looked dazed, with a goofy grin and the kind of cowlick that frustrated hairdressers. She tried to recall his name so she could say hi. Louis? Something like that, I think. He ran between her yard and the neighbors, eyes wide, lips grimacing, then disappeared behind a shed. Huh, strange kid. While Esther waited for her mother to climb down the steps toward the car, a vehicle peeled out of a driveway a few houses down, across from the cemetery, flew down the street past their house. Mom? Huh, I didn't know there was a funeral today, her mother said, staring past the retaining wall, down and across the street at the cemetery's iron picket fence. Usually, when a funeral was underway, people parked along Wolf Street only when the front gate parking lot was full. Today the street was clear. Aren't any cars, Esther said. She waited for her mother to move down the steps, but she stood frozen. Finally, after a moment, Esther peered around her mother and gawped at the strange-looking people dressed in vintage clothes, dirty clothes. What the? Her mother began, then abandoned her words. The people trailed out the back gate of the cemetery and along the street, slow and plodding. Some of them shuffled along, clearly old and ailing. Others seemed younger, gliding along with more ease, more grace. Grief ringed their eyes. Maybe it's a funeral march, Esther suggested. Strange. There's no music. Her mother began, and again she didn't finish her sentence. Must have been a big funeral, Esther suggested, until a man dressed in a black suit and a top hat turned to look back over his shoulder. Tiny beams of sunlight sliced through his body. Mom? Esther tugged on the back of her mother's jacket. Could be a trick of the light. Mom would know. The man turned a bit more to make a way for a woman in a blue dress. No light shone through her, but the man with the top hat? Light still shone through him. Mom, do you see that? Why can I see that through that man? Holy crap, I can see through one, two, a bunch of them. Mom? Then a woman in a blue dress scratched her ear, and it fell off, tumbled down her back and onto the ground. Oh, fuck. Mom! The procession shambled quietly toward Mrs. Avery's house across the street first, her property being beside the cemetery. Beneath a bay window, her English teacher squatted before her small garden, the hem of her smock dress hitched up onto her chubby thighs. Unaware of the procession, she yanked out weeds and tossed them over her shoulder. The closer the cemetery people got to her, the more they fixated on her, the more they sneered. When the man in the top hat was within arm's reach, Miss Avery finally noticed them. She jumped up, yelped, and ran up the porch steps back into her house like she was a young girl again. Esther's mother gasped. Back in the house. Across the street, the people in the procession turned to stare at her. They'd heard her. Somehow, from across the street, they'd heard Esther's mother, and that was enough for them to alter their course. As some of the older ones shambled toward their house, the others found speed. Esther clutched her mom's jacket when she realized that the see-through ones didn't touch the ground. They actually hovered above the cement, and they moved swiftly. Now, Esther! Esther spun around. Her fingers paused above the keypad. Her mind blanked. Unlock the door! Esther! Esther couldn't remember the key code. Only when her mom backed up against Esther did she feel the numbers tumble from her mind. Her fingers retraced the pattern of movement over the keypad and the locked word. She pushed the door open, the force of her mom pushing from behind. Inside, Esther shivered at the thunk of the deadbolt locking into place. "That'll keep him out," her mom said. But it didn't. The first ghost glided through the wall beside the door, obscuring the photo of her and her mom, yet not budging it one bit. Esther froze briefly at the sight of the translucent gossamer figure, her waist severely pinched, the skirt of her dress full and faded and Victorian, Esther commented, recognizing the style of dress from a recent sewing rabbit hole she'd fallen down on the internet. A hand clamped down around her wrist. She flinched at the touch of the icy fingers until she realized her mom had grabbed her. Esther calmed a bit, even when her mom whispered frantically, "Upstairs, now!" As her mom tugged Esther toward the stairs, urging her to climb first, the ghost scowled. Its eyes glowed white with hatred. Halfway up the stairs, a slow scraping started at the front door, loud enough to prick at Esther's nerves. Thankfully, the door stayed shut. Upstairs, Esther witnessed a girl in a paisley dress floating just beyond the window at the far end of the hall. She wasn't much older than Esther, and she wasn't as translucent as the Victorian ghost, but she glided through the window in the wall just the same. Esther gasped as her mom shoved her into the master bedroom and slammed the door shut. "Hide in the closet." Her mom's voice choked during the command, making her sound less uncertain as she pulled at the closet's sliding door. "What good'll that do?" Esther cried. Tears stung her eyes. "They can walk through walls," her mom grunted in frustration. The Victorian woman slid through the door to the bedroom, her head lolled to one side, a snide look of satisfaction flaring her nostrils. Esther and her mom scrambled to the other side of her mom's unkempt bed, where the comforter was rolled into a ball. With their backs to the window, Esther peered over her shoulder. Outside, others from the cemetery, the ones who weren't ghosts, stood lined up on the stoop. They were still flesh and bone, mostly bone, but the front door kept them out no matter how much they clawed and scratched at it. The girl with the paisley dress passed through the bedroom door next, with an ease of grace that caused Esther's mom to shudder. "Can they hurt us?" she wondered, holding Esther tight. Esther wondered too. If these intruders could pass through walls, then could they really touch anything at all? The woman in the Victorian dress drifted closer to them. No heat emanated from the ghost, only a profound chill that made Esther want to dive into a volcano. Not wishing to be near the ghost, Esther caved into her childhood instincts and climbed into her mom's bed, yanking the sheet over her head. Beyond the sheet, she heard a haunting, "Ooh." Esther screamed pitifully when the sheet fluttered beside her. "It's just me," her mom assured Esther, climbing under the sheet next to her. "Maybe if we run. If they can get in here, then where are we supposed to run to? They're everywhere," Esther shouted. Her mom nodded and mumbled, "Pointless." From beyond the sheet came an ethereal huff, followed by a hollow, raspy voice that reminded her of an old radio show. "What are they Halloweening as?" Esther clutched the sheet closer, pulling it tight across her face, wanting to scare them back. Oh, how delightful," the young girl said, sadness tainting her voice. "They're ghosts." At the suggestion, Esther fumbled in her jacket pocket and pulled out a Swiss Army knife, a birthday gift from her father. "Sorry, Mom," she whispered as she flipped open the knife and cut 2 holes in the sheet. She pulled the sheet around her and her mom and stared at their visitors. The Victorian lady, and the girl in the paisley dress lingered at the edge of the bed, while other ghosts slipped through the doors and walls and joined them. The gloom of ghosts regarded Esther and her mom and nodded their approvals. "This is satisfactory," hissed the Victorian lady. Then, one by one, the ghosts glided back through the walls and door, leaving Esther and her mom alone again. "What the?" her mom started again. Esther held up the knife. "Cut eye holes in the bottom sheet. I think they like us being ghosts. Maybe they'll leave us alone now." Her mom resisted at first until Esther rose from the bed and placed the knife in her hand. Conceding, her mother did as Esther told her, swearing under her breath as she pulled up the bottom sheet and cut holes into the fabric. Esther inched carefully up to the window and risked glancing down into their side yard. The folks from the cemetery retreated to the street, some of them scattering the leaves she'd so carefully raked into a pile. As the progression thinned out, Esther caught her reflection in the window. Indeed, she did look like a ghost, the kind she'd seen in cartoons and old TV shows. When her mom joined her by the window, Esther couldn't help herself. She raised her hands, curling her fingers into claws, and said, "Boo!" "Not funny," her mom snapped. She supposed her mom was right. It wasn't funny, the dead coming back like that. "Say words." Mishu's voice brought Esther back to the present, clippers still in hand. Esther didn't think it was possible to say last rites for flowers. Last rites were for people about to die, but according to Miss Avery and the news journalists and the podcasters and Rebecca, the phrase had undergone what was called a semantic shift. The meaning had broadened to include rites for both before and after death in all cultures around the world. Maybe it included flowers too. "Say words," Mishu again, more forcefully this time. Esther wanted to laugh at the absurdity of Mishu's request, but something woeful and unpleasant churned inside her. Something about this seemed like it should be funny, but something else made her stop and consider the consequences. After a deep breath, another giveaway of her being alive, Esther whispered, "Rest in peace." Mishu's wide eyes made a soft, sandpapery sound as she blinked her approval. Then, as though losing interest, her gaze wandered away from Esther and toward Miss Avery's house across the street. The black cat stood with a creak and limped down to the sidewalk, the tip of a thigh bone jutting from her haunch. Dried blood matted the fur along her ribcage. By the looks of her, Esther estimated Mishu had been dead a while, ever since Miss Avery had reported her missing to the Hope Times. And that is the end of the first section of Every Day is Halloween. And I need to hydrate because, wow, that was a lot of reading. And that is the introduction to my book, Every Day is Halloween, and its central themes and what inspired it. And now I would love to get into a chat as best as we can on this platform about what you love about Halloween. What are your favorite costumes and what are your favorite activities to do? I will get started. I don't dress up that much anymore when it comes to Halloween, of course. There's not really a lot of opportunity to. And so I do like to spend the month really I watch horror films most of the time, but usually in October I spend a really good long portion of the month just focusing exclusively on horror movies and reading short horror stories. Yeah. And I know there's a little story that's in my bio in the book, and I mention it briefly, but in high school, I think it was I stopped trick-or-treating, of course, at a younger age, but I still dressed up for high school dances, and I had actually made a black monk's robe and did my face up like I was dead. And we would go out. I lived in Germany at the time, and I was of age when it came to drinking, so we would always get dressed up and go out to the bars and have a beer and play pool. So here's this dead monk, playing pool in a small German town. Lots of fun. Cameron, he likes the pirates. Yeah, especially if he can get his kids on board. Oh, that's awesome. I think I was a pirate once too when I was really, really young. Excuse me. Getting all stuffed up. Okay. Anyone else like to yeah, I don't know. We have an opportunity to go to a party this year. Thinking about what I can do to dress up, and for the first time I think I'm probably going to dress up as something that's not scary. I think I'm going to be an alien. if I can find what I need at the dollar store. So I'm looking forward to that. Just we've got about 15 more minutes left. I mean, I can always go over if you want. If anyone has any questions, now would be a really good time to ask. I do have one question that I always like to have a question to start the Q&A in case there aren't any questions, and it gives me time to kind of talk about something while people come up with ideas. And the question that it is, how does the protagonist's comfort with wearing her costume contrast with her search for her missing friend? And I touched on this earlier when I was talking about the central theme to the story with masking and identity. Ultimately, Esther just feels safer doing things she wouldn't do without the mask. She, for the good portion of the story, is in the embodiment of death. She's wearing a black robe with a skull mask. And I think on some level, just about everyone fears death. Even the dead have a tremendous respect for her as the embodiment of death. And they don't bug her nearly as much as what they bug her friends. And it helps her to be more bold. She gets so bold, in fact, that at one point in the story, when she's searching for clues about Rebecca's disappearance, she goes back to the church where she was last seen, and she demands answers from the local priest, Father Juan, about the relevance of last rites, especially since if nobody who dies actually goes away, and he can't answer her. And it's a very, to me, it's a very poignant scene about how how establishment can fail. And in this case, it's the establishment of religious belief. And it's no way meant to be an attack on religion or disrespectful. It's just, I felt it was a really interesting thing to explore in the context of the story. I'm just going to quickly wrap up. I've got comments coming through here. It's very bold for someone of her age to confront a priest, and I think if she had not been wearing a mask, she wouldn't have been able to do it. So I've got comments coming in here. Let's see. Jen says, every year I don't get dressed up. I feel I'm subtly letting myself down. Oh, come on, Jen. Jen, no. It's okay if you don't get dressed up. Not everyone dresses up. It's a lot of work, like people who have tons of energy, and when I see some of the costumes online that people do, I'm just blown away at the creativity, and it's just awesome. But you get to a point where in life where you're maybe putting your energy into other things, and there's none left over for that. But Jen, I've seen you as a ghost, and you rocked it. Okay. Coming up with a Halloween. Sean says, coming up with a Halloween costume after years of not dressing up is hard. Yes, it is. Especially when you don't have a lot of time to make anything. But Sean says he was thinking of going as an angry pumpkin patch. Okay, I like that. You better do it. Sean asks, why did you go down a military road with some of the returning dead? Oh, yes. So the big bad in the story is a fellow that Esther calls Lefty. He's a lieutenant. He's a World War I lieutenant. I went down the military road because when I'm walking in the cemetery here in Hespeler, I see a lot of military tombstones, and I have a tremendous respect for the military, being raised in an army, like an army environment. I'm an army brat. Um, I it ties into the military road, or the angle that I took. It ties very much into the why the dead came back. I don't want to get into it. It's a big reveal. Um, I really don't want to give it away, but it does tie into that. And what's interesting is that in researching World War I, I was able to place Lefty into that war as a Canadian soldier, and tie in not just Halloween, but the Spanish flu, and it just brought in all this resonance for us right now coming out of the pandemic, and with there being conflict in the Middle East right now, there's always conflict in the Middle East. It just felt like I needed to say something, because I know a lot of people are very much against the military, but without the military, I don't know where we would stand. I don't want to get into a debate about this, because for the most part, I'm mostly a pacifist. I only fight when I absolutely really, really need to. Otherwise, I just find most things are not worth fighting about. And I don't know, it just has a personal connection to me, the military. I and I just love the idea of the skeleton in a World War I soldier's uniform, smoking a cigarette, hanging out in the cemetery, being a bit of being like um, nasty to anyone who walks by. I just love the image of that, and he is also uh, the main um, embodiment of conflict in the story. So, does that answer your question, Sean? And I do not see any more questions. And on that note, I'm going to start wrapping up here. So this is my book, Every Day is Halloween. It's available in print. It's also available as an ebook on most major platforms. I'll include the UBL, the Universal Book Link, which takes you to a page, and you can pick the retailer of your choice. I would always appreciate anyone who purchases a copy and leaves a review. That is the ultimate support for any writer. Oh, Steve says he loves the cover so much. Thank you. I love the cover too. It went through so many iterations, I'll tell you. But I have to say, and I'm surprised I haven't mentioned this. So there's a story behind this cover. So the pumpkins, this is actually from my own photo archive. The photo was taken several years ago. The pumpkins were carved by myself, my husband, and my good friend Sabrina. And that one is mine, that one is Sean's, and that one's Sabrina's. And I love the fact that I was able to pull something from my photo archive and show it and use it on a cover. It's a very satisfying feeling not having to like rely on stock photography. And hopefully I'll be able to do that again someday with another project. And so the books are available. I'm just going to quickly put the link in the comments if I can find where I put it. And okay, because I have way too much up on my screen at the moment. So again, if you go to the link, you'll get a choice between buying the ebook or the print book. And the ebook, I can tell you right now, it's available on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Apple, Nook. The only platform I haven't posted to yet is Google Play, and I hope to do that in the next week or two. Um, there has been a bit of an issue with the Universal Book link, so if you don't see a platform there listed there, just go to the platform and do a search for Every Day is Halloween by Kit Davin and see if it's there. Um, that that's that's the most unfortunate thing about what I just found out like yesterday, that there was a problem with the Universal Book link. If you want more information about the book, you can visit my website, kitdavin.com, and I'll put that up here as well in the comments. And if there are any more questions, I do not see any more. Okay. Anyway, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. It's nice to know that I wasn't just reading to like dead air. I appreciate that very much. And I hope everybody has an amazing Halloween. Oh, yes, and this is important too, and I forgot to mention this afternoon. I do have a preferred method. It really would help me if people would buy off of a platform. I have limited inventory. However, you can buy directly from me if you want a signed copy, and if you do, I would recommend you direct messaging me and we'll sort out the details. The HST will be included in the cost of the book. The book is $20, but I would have to ask for people to pay for their shipping in addition. Thanks, Cam. I appreciate it. Happy Halloween, Cam. Happy Halloween to everyone. But yes, my preferred method is ordering online if you can. I will, if you live in the kind of in the Cambridge, Guelph area, I can actually maybe arrange to have it dropped off if you're that close. But I think anything outside of half an hour outside of Cambridge would be too not worth it. I'd have to ship it. And on that note, I'm just going to say thank you, everybody, for showing up and coming here and being a part of this launch. I really appreciate it. It's been a long journey getting this book finished, and I'm glad it's done. I'm very, very pleased with how it turned out. Yeah, and I just want to wish everyone an amazing Halloween, and I hope that you enjoy yourselves and stay safe. Have a good night, everyone.